Hi, I'm Maggie Coulter, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Barbara Fellgiebel last month. Barbara is the granddaughter of General Erich Fellgiebel, who was involved in the Operation Valkyrie July 1944 attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler. She will be doing a speaking tour this May in the West Coast, and I interviewed her prior to that, starting with the question of why is she giving these talks? Hi, Barbara. Why did you start giving these talks?
Well, it all goes back to the 90s in Portugal. I used to live there, and my children attended the international school. And my son came back with a history book one day and said he would go through World War II. And I said, great. And looked into the book, and the first sentence I read was, all Germans were Nazis. And I went garrity and went to the teacher and said, what rubbish are you teaching? She said, excuse me? And I said, well, Google Erich Fellgiebel. And she did. And I got a lovely letter of apology. And she saw to the fact that the book was exchanged. And years later, I moved to Sweden, and I'm a cultural worker and do a lot of writing and organize literature events. And my writing colleagues used to ask me, what did you do in World War II? But I didn't do anything then. But my grandfather was the first general of the signal troops and gave his life in joining the group trying to assassinate Hitler, and was captured and subsequently tortured 6 weeks and then hung. And when I mentioned that, people used to say, you must talk about this. This is so interesting. This is incredible. And that's what I started to do in 2017.
So the story of your grandfather is both historical and very personal. How has the story affected you and your family over time?
Well, as I said, being born in the middle of last century in Germany, you did not feel proud of being of German descent. Actually, the fact that my grandfather was an incredible hero and gave his life trying to get rid of Hitler was the kind of outweighed the shame I felt all my life for being a German. And he has dominated my life incredibly. I've obviously never met him, but he has been so right forward and so adamant with his values and his beliefs, and that has been a great inspiration for me.
So, as you mentioned, you grew up in post-war Germany. How were the Nazi resistance and the assassination attempts like Operation Valkyrie addressed in school? And how did this affect you given your personal connection?
That was a real difficult time, because whenever the teachers went through the names in class, they stumbled upon Fellgiebel and said, Fellgiebel? Fellgiebel? Have you got anything to do with this general? Yes, that was my grandfather, I very proudly said. And then quite a few teachers said, you don't need to be proud of that. It's he and his colleagues that caused the fact that we lost the war. He was a traitor. And I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. There were various attempts, both military, and in all there were 29 attempts to get rid of Hitler. And there were groups dominated by social democrats, by communists, by various religious groups, by students, and by the military. And they all tried one way or the other to get rid of Hitler. And only in recent years, the last 10 years, I can say, they start to get recognition for what they did, and that they lost hundreds of lives in this attempt. But before that, they were not recognized at all.
In Germany.
In Germany.
Yeah. That was actually, I was going to do a follow-up question and just say, what do you know? I mean, I know you haven't lived in Germany for a long time, but is that all taught differently now in school then with this recognition? Are you aware of how it's being taught?
Yes. I've recently started to go to schools in Germany. I love to talk to young people in school, because you get completely different questions, as I mentioned before, and a whole new outlook on the whole thing. And yes, the teachers are very, very different now. It's a different generation, and they start to understand how important that was, and yeah, that it was something positive, and that they were not traitors.
Why is this thing that happened 80 years ago still relevant today?
It's more relevant than ever, because we are now quite spoiled, having lived quite some years in a more or less democratic society. We cannot imagine what it was like to live under a totalitarian regime like Nazi Germany was. You don't dare to speak your mind. You write an article as a journalist, and you find yourself the next day in prison. And the power of the like KGB or Gestapo, they are so extremely powerful under these totalitarian regimes that people very quickly don't dare to do anything, don't dare to say anything, and they lose their belief in what's right and what's wrong only because they're so very scared.
Have you met any other people kind of in your same situation, that is to say descendants of people that were, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, after the 20th of July, thousands of Germans got taken by the Gestapo because they had this thing called Sippenhaft. Sippenhaft means that if you bear the same name as one of the people involved in the attempt to kill Hitler, you would be guilty, whether you knew about it or not. And most of the families, they did not know about it, because the people who had planned it, they were quite aware that this would happen, and they held their families as far away from it as possible. And nevertheless, they all got into prison, and after some days or weeks or months, they got released again. But the experience must have been dreadful. And the worst thing is that the widows of generals and high officers, they didn't get compensation. They didn't get any money. So quite, I suppose, 1950 more or less, there was a foundation called the 20. Juli 1944, and they got together always on the 20th of July and helped each other financially. And they still get together on the 20th of July if Corona permits. And I try to go there in Berlin and meet these descendants.
I think it's exciting. You're coming to the West Coast, and I'm going to speak to some German organizations and some classes. And do you have anything else you want to add?
I want to say that I'm extremely excited and grateful that I'm giving this opportunity to come to the States. And I planned to do that 2 years ago, but then Corona came. And I'm very much looking forward to wherever I speak and to experience a completely new audience with Americans will be fantastic.